Thank you, everyone. And I want to, I guess, set the scene by looking at the task at hand that I had many months ago when Siobhan asked me to have people bear witness to my journey of being a person that's started a couple of businesses and then gone through a journey and are now helping people at various stages of their business, including people like Sahil and others in our very vibrant now ecosystem of startups in this region. I think we've got a great opportunity here, and having been around business for a while, you only see, I think, these cycles come every so often, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we go forward. When you've been in business for a time, you've been working with people, you get a sense of when there are opportunities. I think this is a time of opportunity. So let's just define what Startup Stories is, so we're all off the same page. It's good that we can define that starting point. So for me, I'm going to interpret what Siobhan asked us to do. So let's define what an enchilada is and what a whole enchilada is. So there's various parts of what I'm going to do today, and the statement that was put to us to do these Startup Stories is the following. Startup Stories founders talk candidly about their experience as an entrepreneur and business owner, the highs, the lows, the wins, the mistakes, the whole enchilada. So that's what I'm going to do today. Now, the way I'd like to do it is maybe add to some of the others that have preceded me. So we've had Andrew Mears, we've had Trent Bagman from Slingshot, Gemma Enright from Money Brilliant, and Lloyd Davies, who we worked with at the Business Centre from Scrub It. So there's a good fabric of stories there. If you haven't watched them already, haven't looked at them, it's worthwhile going through them. Now, mine's going to be a little bit different. Those that have preceded me and those that will come after me are people that are deeply already ingrained in an actual startup for most of what I can see. So they're people that are telling their story as they are now, or part of the journey they've been through and where they're currently at with their startup. My presentation is going to draw on things a little bit differently, and it's interesting for me because this is a process of introspection. Having not got something to tell you about that I'm doing now in regards to a business or a startup, I've looked at this a little bit differently. I've hopefully put together some information that is from a learned experience. So it's been a little bit soul searching at times because there's been lots of ups and downs in my journey, and at the same time I'm mixing up what I'm telling you with the work that I've done with others. So it's a combination of a lived experience in business, a lived career before that brought me to the point of starting a business, and a lived experience helping others. So my presentation is going to be in three parts, and it'll be a series of threes if you like. Part one will be a presentation a little bit about setting the scenes of my background and the journey of my life. And I'm going to show you a little mind map in a moment, which will give us a bit of a reference point as a context that all of us go through life, and there are many unexpected things that happen. Many people that we meet along the way that send us off in one direction or another, and I've got a nice little slide that I've pinched based on something I did I'll talk about in a moment. So it'll be a series of threes, three-part presentation, and then in the section where I'm going to talk about the highs, the lows, the wins, the big celebration of the mistakes and so on, I'm going to give you three in each of those. So I'm not going to give you a long narrative and story about all of my tribulations and trials. I'm going through this process. What I did was break each of those areas down into three key findings, if you like, or 3 points which I think I can share with you from the lows, the highs, the wins, the mistakes, and so on. The next part, I'd like to contextualise the journey a bit, so I'm going to include some personal reflections, some business experiences, both as a business owner, but how I've helped others, as I've said, and the startup process. And then towards the end, I'd like to indulge you a little bit in something we spoke earlier, one of the guests in the room today, we spoke earlier about the psychology of starting a business, the whole process of I've come up with this great idea. How did that come about? What's my style? What's the theory around innovation and innovative economies that are at a stage where they're ready for innovation? And I'm going to try not to use too much jargon. I promise it's probably only used it once or twice. We've heard it so much. But disruption, a shift in the way business cycles are working, new technologies, new ways of doing business, new entrants into the market. I want to talk about that a little bit more deeply, and that's where I've shamelessly stolen from Malcolm Gladwell, he of Tipping Point and the theory of 10,000 hours. 10,000 hours and you can achieve anything. a great book in itself and a good read. So that's my approach, a three-part approach. How does that sound? Can you bear with me through that as we roll through that? Okay, let's do that. So that's a bit of a mixture of my journey. At the present time, though, is where I've ended up. And where I've ended up is working with a great team of people at the Business Centre. Business Centre is a profit-for-purpose organisation. I'll talk a bit more about how I've arrived there, but it's a great place to be. I work with my colleague Pierre Malou and a great team of advisors who help people at whatever stage their business is at. And I take a great deal of joy from that, and I'll share some of that today. But a little bit more about me. Born in Scotland, quite a long time ago now, and that experience of having grown up and been educated in a lot of countries, moving back and forward, making Australia my home, but travelling around the world as well, I think has brought a perspective to my approach to business and life that I think is a richer fabric. I've been made richer for that. So I had a brief career in professional sport and moved from soccer, as we call it here in Australia. It was football and a religion where I came from in the north of Scotland. But when I arrived in Australia, I was converted to rugby, a great game that it is and gave me great pleasure. I then moved around the public sector. Come back to that in a moment. I then moved around the public sector, and I want to tell you a little bit about how did that lead into me wanting to be in business and what journey that was. But I just want to, if I can, set the scene in regards to the business area that I moved into, but set the landscape, just a reference. And I'm going to come back to this in more detail in a moment. It's just this happenstance, this collisions, and Sahil, you know, we've worked a little bit with you during the years, and you'd be very conscious of the journey and sometimes the unexpected things that happen. And you know, I think the language in startup terminology is pivoting. You know, there's a lot of pivoting that goes on. But we'll come back to this in a minute. But essentially, what this is about is a Malcolm Gladwell podcast, which I listened to over and over again with my headphones and broke it down because I found it so intriguing about the whole concept of innovation and creativity. How do we create? How do ideas occur? And he bases it around the Leonard Cohen song Hallelujah and the journey that took. And if any of you are familiar with it or not familiar with it, I want to go through this in a minute. But essentially what it's saying is, that's the central piece. How do we develop an idea? And what's the journey of that idea to its eventual resolution or its eventual success? And what does success look like along the way? And with this song, Leonard Cohen did enjoy a great deal of success with this song when he wrote it. And he struggled with the creation of that creative process. But then others came into his life or intersected with that song. And a whole range of different circumstances occurred. And then, as a result of that, I guess the fully formed ownership and realisation of that creative piece occurred many, many years later. But there was a lot of success, and there was a lot of traction, and there was a lot of movement around that going forward. But I'm going to unpack that a little bit more at the end. But I want to give it as a reference point for today, and for you to maybe use back in your life and in your business life and your idea, to keep in mind that the best intentions about where you're going to go with this idea and what might happen are going to be intersected by many other players along the way. I guess the base of this oversight is that this wasn't successful to start with, and it wasn't accredited and it wasn't recognised, but eventually it was. So, and I've got an old friend and mentor in the audience today, and I'm certainly sure he, as I would share the notion of when I started a business, the whole idea of a startup, we didn't get around when you start a business and I've got a startup. You know, there's a whole lexicon and a whole language and a whole excitement that's occurred around that, but I just want to set the scene for me. When I started a business, we didn't use the term startup. We were starting a business to do something, to sell something, to make something, to open a shop, whatever it might be. But I did go back and do some research on that, and I did find that there was a definition in Forbes magazine. They spoke of startups as early as 1976, but you can see the derivation of the word before that. And then much more recently, we become a little bit more familiar with the concept of startups. And so at the business centre, when we're working with people, I think there's a certain energy around more this interpretation of what a startup is. But I just want to re-emphasise that for me, when I began a business, the concept of a startup didn't exist. And maybe that's not a bad position to take as you go forward in your journey. Don't get too caught up in the energy of this whole excitement, buzz, some of the people that feed around that and feed off that. There are some fundamentals to business that remain. It doesn't matter what you call it. So, okay, so we've had Mr. Zuckerberg, and maybe that myth of the startup being two guys in a garage in Silicon Valley starting a tech company is maybe what the conventional perception of what a startup might be, what people might place upon you, or you and your journey about what your startup is. But and at that time we had companies such as Apple, AOL, Amazon, Yahoo, Google, and then Facebook in the 2000s. Facebook, though, if you look back at the facts, Facebook is really the last super major startup that we've had. All of the others since, and there's some talk about this, an article that I read recently, talks about the fact that many of the other startups since this time have been nowhere near that scale. Your Airbnbs, Uber, for example, Slack, Snap, Squarespace, they haven't all necessarily been of the same scale. So there's an adjustment, there's a waning, and if you look at some of the recent hearings in the American parliamentary system, the Senate and the House recently had Zuckerberg have to testify in regards to their algorithm and in regards to whether their space, their monopoly space, the same for Amazon and Bezos, is this a time for regulation? Is this another adjustment in the startup cycle, in innovation in our current economy, in our current world? So there's change going on again. So let's say we're using the word startup to define what we're talking about today, but even that itself is being redefined. Seek and Atlassian are great stories from Australia about startups, but even them are no longer startups. They've got HR departments now and policies and procedures. So the edge in regards to them being startups, they're more now conventional companies. They're in the top 500, top 300 companies in Australia and in the world. But I want to focus more now on this region in regards to giving some context. We're really well placed here, and what I do day after day with Pierre and my colleagues at the Business Centre is realise the DNA is good here in this region. The underpinning fundamentals are very good. A port, an airport, great road transport, good connection, good road corridor all the way down to the Central Coast. Tremendous DNA and background in mining, agriculture, winemaking, equestrian, port works and transport in and out of the country. So the fundamentals are very good for this region to be perhaps a place where we can grow innovation, where we can collaborate with others, and where we can attract others to the city. Of course, we look outside the building today and we've got the beginnings of new infrastructure, and underpinning this infrastructure in this region is smart technology, smart city, clean tech. So we are going to be a tremendous environment for startups. But one thing I realised from business, which was not there when I started, was how globally connected we are. It sounds obvious, but when our business started, we had no concept, and I'll talk about that a little later, of how broadly we could reach people and what technology would give us to allow other people to get what we had when we started with. When we started with it, and I'll talk about it shortly, it was very much a different business model to what we ended up with, and our reach was much larger, and we did that from here in the Hunter. Another convention that I want to challenge in talking today is that although if we look at the Australian innovation ecosystem, it's dominated by Sydney. Say 35% of startups are in Sydney, 15% in Melbourne, and about 9% in Brisbane. But sometimes that information can be a bit biased and a bit skewed, because often the data that's brought forward with regards to startups is where they originate their IP, so where they might lodge their patent or their trademarking, and often that'll be in a major capital city. I probably put forward a challenge to that a lot of innovation occurs in regional areas, and that it's only with the lodgement of that it gets picked up. A lot of the pre-thought, a lot of the energy, a lot of the resources and thinking can come from regional areas, and we're well placed to be that regional area. So, if we look back where I started, about that definition of startups, Facebook is the last really big tech startup that we've had on the planet, and that was in February 2014. So we haven't really had anything of that scale come along since. So there's fragmentation occurring, there's specialisation, there's different streams occurring in startups. I just want to share, as Sahil said at the start, there's a wonderful and rich community of support in our region that I think you should all be aware of. You're part of that today by being here as part of this workshop. But there are many other players that can provide support to your journey at whatever stage you're at. Whether you are scratching your head about finances, whether you're not quite sure what I do around IP, how do I partner up with a researcher, how do I get connected to an opportunity to pitch my idea in front of people who can give me feedback or invest, how do I get professional advice about people that understand about setting my business up and getting it in the right structure to move forward. We've got a great texture of support in this local community now. I'm going to talk very briefly. This group of organisations in an exciting project coming forward in May is taking a thing called the Startup Express down to Sydney. I guess practising what we preach in this region. We've worked really closely with 1804 on that, and of course with Siobhan and others in the startup ecosystem here in the Hunter. We're going to take a bus of 26 startups that we've worked with over the last 2 years. We're taking them to the Safetee conference for 3 days. We've invested in a landing pad there in the exhibition space. They're going to pitch 8 pitches a day to that conference. There'll be quite a number of people will be attending that conference nationally and internationally. And then on the evening of the first day of the conference, we're taking the 5 best startups as we've seen them in terms of investable capacity, where they're at in terms of scalability. We're putting them in front of a room on the 34th floor of the headquarters of Ernst & Young, in partnership with Ernst & Young and their innovation division, to see if we can get some engagement and some investment in those companies from our region, but not with the view of them taking them away, but of them investing in them, investing back in this region as a dynamic economy to invest in. All brought about by this collaborative network. So jump into collaborative networks. All right, starting a business. Work is business, business is work. For me, that in the end, I had some predetermined thoughts about what I thought it was going to be when I went into business. And business isn't what you think it is when you're not in it. So you might have an idea, you might be at a stage of business at the moment, or you might be playing with the idea of having a business. Business is hard work. There's no two ways about that. That might be stating the obvious, but I think I had a slightly different perception of it when I began than what it actually turned out to be. So I began with the concept of a business, thinking that was the business that I eventually ended up in, and the structure of what it was and what we did and who we worked with. I'll talk a little bit more on that as we go on in terms of context and a reference. But I was a public servant, that's really what I did, apart from the early parts of my life when I was doing other things. And I took great pleasure in working in that. I learned a lot of skills. I think I did all right. I don't know how I rose up through the ranks. A bit of luck, a bit of things that I didn't understand why I got promoted, and other times I think I did quite well at things I moved through. And that was in the education and training sector. And then for a short time I took on a greenfields project in managing a program and a facility that was built across 3 different sites and staffed it. We did it all in 3 or 4 months, and then I left that project after 3 years. It was an Australian technical college, a brand new model of delivering education in a different way. So very exciting, greenfields project, and in a commercial environment, which I highly enjoyed. And it was during these times that I was playing around with the notions of starting a business, and I thought, given my skill set, I'll start up a consultancy. And that was my first business, which was called Innovate. And then a pivot, a change of direction. Knew that I had an ability to look at very complex things, break them down into a system, and a systematic approach, and provide a practical solution to people working mainly in training, policy, and eventually we started working in occupational health and safety, workplace health and safety, environment and infrastructure. So these were the areas where I thought I had skill, and I thought I'll start a consultancy. Now, that consultancy morphed into what eventually became a business called Safetee Pro, and then eventually into another business called ePart Safety, which is part of a larger group called the ePart Group. And I'm going to now reflect on this first part of the presentation on that, with a little bit of a flavour of what I'm doing now. But this, for me, I've not done this. I've not spoken about this publicly since I exited the business, and I've not had to be, as I said at the beginning, this introspective about that journey. So this is a very personal insight. I need to be respectful of others along the way, which I will do because this is being recorded and shared, which I would agree that it can be done. So along the way, if I am respectful of that in the way that I talk about certain matters, you'll understand where I'm coming from in terms of exit. But I took an exit from the final iteration of my company and my business life over the period of 2014. And I'll talk a little bit about that as well. What does happen? And one of the things, and I will acknowledge that Jim, my accountant for a lot of years, is here. And I want to acknowledge that along the way I had some good advice. Probably should have listened to some of the advice at different times a little bit better, and I'll talk about that. But I want to give a sense of exiting from a business. The third time around when I had a business, I did a lot better than the first time, but I learned a lot from each iteration of having a business, and I want to share that. So, the highs. So, who's currently operating a business? Okay. Who's at a stage where they are looking to start a business? Okay. All right. Who's just looking at business as an area of interest, from a theoretical academic standpoint? Okay. Good. Right, this should be something for everyone here. Okay. So, the highs. I didn't realise until I did this self-reflection that I did start a business and that I did create something from nothing. And when we talk about this during the day, that's pretty good. When I left the business, there was some, I'll talk about the lows and some of the mistakes, but I guess I concentrated on the fact that I left the business, maybe not when I wanted to, about what could have been, and about what happened along the way. But it's not until you do this that, in terms of a high, it's pretty good. I started something from a piece of paper, literally, from a piece of paper to a business that ended up on a digital platform, with hundreds of clients across Australia, and with opportunities and movement towards taking that business across to other countries as well. So that's a high. So if you're going to start a business, one of the things I'll share now, which I'll talk on in one of the next slides, is the exit. And Jim was always talking to me right from the beginning, and I could have listened better, but he always spoke to me, and in advising people now in business in startups, have in mind the end when you're at the beginning. What is your exit? Third time round, I had a document, a shareholder agreement that had clauses in it that at least we had a guide point, we had a reference point to allow us to have difficult discussions, because there were three of us in the business at that stage, difficult discussions around the end point, the exit, and what that means to you and your life going forward after you've been in business for a number of years. So, I made a good decision to leave the business, knowing when to stop. That was a difficult year in regards to the business, but the exhilaration of having put in place the right processes eventually to take an exit was a high. Not at the time going through it, certainly not, but the mere fact that I had an ability, difficult as it was, to take an exit instead of being left in an unending cycle when you found yourself at not being at a point where you wanted to continue, you could take an exit. So there's a little bit of learning in there. Now the next one is in regards to my last high is where I am now. Without 1 and 2, I couldn't be at 3, which is working with a person I've got a great deal of respect with and others at the business centre in being able to help people in business. There's nothing better. I like working with people. I've been through the process. We've got great referral partners such as the Garris Group that we can pass people on to, and we can entrust them to look after people as they go forward in their journey. So a high for me is being here now, being able to talk to people about business in an informed way. Great thing about the business centre, and we say this often about the business centre, is we're an honest broker. You will be, at whatever stage you're at in business, be subject to people coming up to you and asking you or giving you promises of what they can or can't deliver. In terms of services, it might be a website, it might be a shareholder agreement, it might be an investment arrangement, whatever it might be. One of the things that we're very proud of at the business centre is we're an honest broker. We don't take equity, we don't take a cut or a slice. We're an organisation that's been around for 34 years and we like to help. But we're so well connected to the ecosystem, we can share that with people as they go through their journey. So, with my business, we started off with a business in regards to what we had, where we developed a system. The system was the complexity of legislation, and what do you do to make sure that your business and the businesses we work with, the narrow channel we found, and I'll talk more about business models and a business model and a value proposition later, but the business channel we found was working with golf courses and race courses. So there were many players out there providing work health and safety systems and solutions and services across industry. You can think of it yourself, it's everywhere. But we narrowed down after a time. Now there's a lot of iterations. We started with construction, we then started working with concreters and electricians. But we eventually found, through pivoting and adjusting, that we found a sweet spot with golf courses and race courses. Why? Because there was a similarity. Turf, grass, use of chemicals, use of machinery, similar. Race courses, not many in Australia. There was a pyramid of those that could afford what we had to offer, and the same with golf courses. It was a very triangulated industry. A lot of golf courses that sitting on the bottom in terms of what they could spend on what we had to offer. But there was a wonderful peak of courses and facilities at the top. So we developed a solution which we thought, now this is the part I want to share with you that is a good insight for your business and what you're doing going forward. We thought we delivered the world's best solution. And we built what was a system, and it was originally called Safetee Pro, and it was just one version of a system, a paper-based system, where we did all the hard work, all the legwork, to convert all of that complex legislation and training material and safe work ethic statements and chemical registers and so on, and we converted that into a diary. Because these guys in this industry worked on seasons, a very seasonal industry. They found it really hard, burdensome, to always be doing work health and safety checks, safety inspections, chemical registers. We thought, what if you could bring all that together into a seasonal diary and we lay it out for them? They have to do it, but we do the intellectual legwork. And so we created that. We created that solution, we put it into a diary, we had an accompanying folder with all of their documentation, which we customised to their site, and they had a solution, and it cost $750. We thought, yippee, we've done it. We've achieved what we needed to achieve. The challenge in this was, we didn't think it through. We did later, but I wish I'd done it at the start. What we didn't offer, and it's, you kick yourself that it's common sense that you didn't do it to start with, but the pre-thinking we did do was, some people liked us a lot. Some people liked the solution we had and how we worked a lot. We didn't have anything else to give them. We just had the $750 solution. We didn't have anything else. So the iteration in our business that we created was to create 3 tiers of service. To create a $750 version, a $3,000 version, and what we call a very unique and smartly I call it, platinum version. So a $5,000 version. And then we created a 3 and a 5 year licence arrangement. So they weren't buying it for 1 year, and we were engaging with them to get the sale, to get them converted, to be a believer in what we had. And to take up our product, and then had to go back to them in November of that year, so they would buy it again to use in the next year. And then we amortised the cost to them, but we had them sign a licence so that they could buy what we had over 3 or 5 years. Now I've told this story a number of times, but I can't believe how obvious that is, but how much I should have thought about it at the start. I think my whole business model and the way that my business went would have been so much different if I thought about it at the beginning. look at the commitment, look at the depth, look at the level. Same product, just thinking differently about the customer. Courses and facilities that were exclusive courses and facilities that had memberships of $30,000 or $60,000 a year. They were able to pay what we had, but we only could take $750 from them for our service at that time. So when you think about your model, whatever your business is, think about that. So, let's just play. So the business centre, which was my last point on that slide, is a good place to be. It's not a complaint, it doesn't matter. All I want to say is we do things like work with small businesses. We work with, we've set up a desk, a China desk, so that people who are interested in working overseas, whether they actualise their idea, whether they're a partner or joint venture, we've got a China desk. We've got an IP desk, so that people can come in and get IP information before they make a jump to go and pay an IT attorney. And we've got another desk soon that we hope to announce around design, so people have got a product and they need a prototype and get it through an MVP. So we've got a really exciting community that can help people at different stages, and I just wanted to share with you that. All right, the lows of the enchilada. These weren't very difficult to find, but more difficult to drag back into the forefront of my mind. I guess why is this so about the lows? I guess because they're deeply felt when you're in business. So be aware that you're going to probably come across some lows, and you hide them very well. You shouldn't forget them, and you don't forget them. And I guess you learn best from them. They're often the place of biggest growth. So in 3, for me, on this introspection journey of, remember, startup founders talk candidly about their experience as an entrepreneur and business owner, the highs, the lows, the wins, the mistakes, the whole enchilada. So my first low was the completely unavoidable reality that I nearly ruined my whole family's life by putting at risk everything at one point in my business cycle or investment or stage. So that day of realising that is a day that's very wrenching, dislocating, overwhelming, time-consuming. You know, that lying in bed staring at the ceiling type of thing. I remember that day exactly. It was raining, it was dark, and I remember coming home, telling my family, and then going for a run in the rain. So that was a very clarifying day, big low. So I wanted to be, in my presentation, as I said, to share that. I'm not going to go any further than that, than to say that was number 1. Number 2 is a feeling of failure and the vacuum that this can create in your confidence and in your worth. And remember how much you might invest in this journey. How much, I'd say, you need to be cautious of and aware of. And how far is it going to take you, and make some decisions with the support of those around you that can help you make good decisions along the way. So it's challenging, particularly when, you know, in the beginning, our first business, I remember we spent a lot of money on, in the early days, before technology became as intuitive and as advanced as it was now. We had to use a guide using FileMaker Pro, some of you might remember that, which was a database, and we were trying to create a dashboard system for the systems which we poured a whole heap of money in to try and get a solution before the technology was ready. And you know, I remember thinking, oh my God, I feel terrible now. We've done all that, and what have we come up with? We've come up with a pretty shit database. So along the way, you know, you lose your confidence, but you've got to get back up. And then there, of course, there is, you know, what could have been. I started a business relatively late in life. By the time I started a business fully engaged in it and left employment and worked in the business, I had 3 children. a reasonable mortgage, and all of the challenges of being a father and a parent and a husband and working in a business at the same time. And you're always going to get a curveball from family as much as you think you're not. So they're my lows. All right, the wins. As I said at the beginning, we started our business from nothing, and I was proud of that. But when I first did this presentation, I did the whole presentation, and I didn't even read wins. I just read over it. I didn't actually. I had to do this slide about a week ago because I hadn't done one. I've been working on this for a couple of weeks, and I hadn't done a slide on wins. It's funny. I don't know whether that's me, whether that's the Australian tall poppy component coming at me that I don't know how to song and dance about it, or whether it's just something that just was a mistake. I don't know, but I did have a look at it. So, what I want to say about wins from the outset, and I'll talk about a specific example on the next slide, but what I want to talk about wins is, for me, it wasn't big, days of champagne corks and, parties when we had big sales and that sort of thing. I think wins for me and wins for us was little wins along the way. And it's only when you look back at them that you realise when those wins happen. So if you're going to go looking for the big win and the big windfall, good luck. But from my experience, it's a slow build, it's slow wins. So for me, the key win at the beginning was actually being able to hold a business together, and I'll show some slides later about the full impact of that, holding a business together through turbulence. Holding the customers together, holding it together through different technologies. Those of you that can recall, we ached and pained over converting our business from a paper-based business to giving people a digital version of what we had on a CD or a DVD, because we had video material as well. We produced animations to allow people to play those in the workplace and then do online assessments, so they could do safety environment assessments. And I remember we ached and pained over the technology. Some of you in the room might recall, as I would, how tricky that was to give away your IP when someone could crack your DVD or your CD and resell it. So that was a real issue for us. But then, that went away pretty quick when we could create our own portal, our own platform, and our own secure website where people could have a unique password and come into their own unique environment. And we managed to hold that together, and that was a great win. Being able to successfully adapt smart, or our original idea, adapt smart, our idea to adjacent markets. Now let me just give you a quick reflection there. It might be something you can use in your own thinking. Remember I said we took our business eventually, we narrowed it down to a nice channel of golf courses and race courses, turf environments. There's a great term that I came across only recently, which it was what we did, but I didn't know what it was at the time, is an adjacent market. So, as I said, think of us driving into golf courses, working with greenkeepers, the superintendents, helping them with their vehicle management, their chemical management in the sheds that they worked on, out in the greens, out in the conditions, slopes, water, whatever it was. We then just had to turn around in that facility and there was something else. There was an adjacent market. That was the clubhouse where the golf professional was, where the bar was, where the chefs were, and the hospitality centre. And so we discovered and found an adjacent market. So we adapted what we had. Because if you looked at our system, it was already custom built for that type of environment. We just had to add in another element and then have a conversation about aligning that system, give them a seamless compliance management system across their whole facility. And we were able to double our income at each facility because they would buy a system for the golf course and they would buy a system for the clubhouse. So that was another win. Now that just didn't happen, let's do that guys. It didn't happen overnight. We had to trial the system, we had to buy the system, we had to develop relationships with people who would make decisions to buy the system, and we had to sell it in a way that was acceptable to them. So that was a good win. And using new delivery technology early without losing customers. And you'll see what I mean shortly about that when I expand on that a little bit more. But what I want to say there is, we realised in the first few years, and this is the key, that we wanted to recognise in a business, so you think of any business, And we think of the profile, and by that I'm talking about the customers, not in the business you're selling to or the market you're selling to. And again, from working in the business, I've become much more aware of how important it is to be clear on this through concepts like building a customer avatar. What does your customer look like? Where do they eat? How many children have they got? What car do they drive? What gender are they? Customer avatars. And what I think in reflection we did there in our industry, because of the stage it was at, we understood that in a golf course, typically the person that was making some of the decisions about buying our product was the CEO of the clubhouse, or the general manager, and the superintendent or the head greenkeeper that was managing often some of these businesses. Royal Sydney, for example, has got a whole team of people that work in that facility and massive budgets for chemicals and machinery and labour. So, but when you looked at the profile of the business, and this is what we looked at, the person, and often in cases, the person that was making some of the decisions about spending the money was not at the same level of using technology as some of the people who are up and coming in the business. So we discovered at the stage when we began, which I'll unpack soon, that there were people that were using mobile technology, mobile phones, and there were guys in the businesses and girls in the businesses that were using computers, whereas some of the older people in the workplace were using paper-based systems and not even using all the technology that was available in their Nokia, it was at that stage, or BlackBerry, whatever it might have been. But younger people, we found, were using that technology much more in the way that they worked, and they were much more likely to look for solutions that were based on new technologies. So don't think you've got the right it in your first iteration of your business. Define generationally what's happening to your customers, contextually what's happening to them as your business evolves and your marketplace evolves. Because you might have in mind, this is who it's for, this is who it's for, this is who it's for. I've got the solution, but then you go, oh, hold on, what happens in 5 years about the decision makers, about the people that are going to adopt what it is that I've got to sell? Who are they then? And it's not the same in all cases. Okay, this is only a very small glimpse. PGA was one of the best sales that I got in our business, and they were a great customer, a business with over $20 million turnover. That for us was a great coup in getting them as a customer. As you can imagine, in our industry, they're a big organisation, and they wanted someone to help them manage Tier 1, Tier 2 and Tier 3 tournaments. So your Australian PGA tournament, your top level tournament, all the way through to their pro-ams, their celebrity pro-am tournaments. So they asked us to build a system. Now remember I said adjacent markets? We kind of had a system that was right for them, but not quite. So with the PGA, we essentially engaged a designer to basically build a system that did everything that they wanted, put that into a PowerPoint presentation, and costed it out for them, and gave them some sample, sample deep dives into what the system could do, and we presented that at one of their board meetings at Melbourne Airport, and they can see the excitement of what it was we were trying to do. The truth of the matter was we hadn't had a system built for them at all, but we were able to articulate what we could do for them in a fully formed way. So we had buttons that you could press, and we had samples of things that what would happen when you press that button, but we didn't have a fully formed system to show them. Now I wouldn't have had the gall or the confidence or the insight to do that when I began in business, to project ahead what it is you think you can do. And so that might mean re-skinning what you've got for a different facing market. It might mean pulling out some elements of what you've got for one customer and not have it in there for another customer when you present it to them. But it was a lesson learned for me in getting a good customer over the line by really listening to what they wanted and showing them we could do it, but not necessarily investing heavily in the front end of building a whole system for them, building a whole solution. Okay, mistakes. All right, I've got to do it. I've got to talk about it. Now this is the opportunity for me, I guess, to share the most important part of the enchilada. I guess the bit with the hot chili in it, the bit that stings. But one good thing about eating chili is that after it digests, and you get that relief, the endorphins, when the chili's over. So mistakes, if you face up to them, are very, very painful.
and can hurt, but after you've made the mistake, you know, to err is human, you know, one of those cliches, you live and you learn. If you do go back and look at your mistakes, as painful as they might be, I think it's a useful exercise. So my shared wisdom today, drawn a little bit from being a business owner, a little bit from you know, starting a business and commercialising business, right through to being at the business centre, I'm going to share with you now as part of my startup story. Right. So I made mistakes the first time around, second time around, third time around. Usually not the same mistakes. Sometimes the mistakes were bigger because the stakes were bigger, and sometimes they were quite different mistakes. Well done me. Well done. You know, insanity, as they say, is repeating the same mistakes and expecting different results. So I'm pretty sure, Jim, did I make the same mistakes? Did you? Were they different? They were related. Thank you. A very political answer. Thank you, Jim. So what does my analysis of mistakes mean? What can I share with you about them? How can I distill them down in this enchilada thing? I want to say that we're about to move into the next part of the presentation, and that will be a little less introspective in terms of my own personal experience, but more around what I've learned, theory, practice, etc. But let's take a bit of a dive into this. First one is, don't be too rash, don't be too quick, dwell longer. And a saying that once I was told when I was, I guess, rushing down the road of a solution, and it was when I was, from my career in public service, a much better operator than I, and a really highly respected director in the Department of Education and Training, once said to me, Steve, hasten slowly. And it was really good advice, because I've got a real sense of what that means. It means when you're going quick, do it slow, and there's a really good opportunity to do something. It's not going to go away quickly. You might think it might, but to tell the truth, in my experience, opportunities, although they come along, you don't often get an opportunity you haven't gone after it and done some preparation. If you do get one of those ones that's not expected, they don't come along often. And you probably, if you do with it right, you've probably done preparation to take the best out of the opportunity. So, I love that saying. If you just think about the context of it, it's a really good maxim to come back to when you're thinking you're going to run off and take the next opportunity, or you're going to rush towards a solution to something that you think you've got the answer to. So, hasten slowly. Now, as I've shared with you, and just reflect back when I spoke about the highs. Remember I spoke when we put something out into the market for $750 and eventually ended up with something for $5,000 over 3 or 5 years? That would have been a good time to hasten slowly. Hasten slowly at the $750. And we'll talk about, well, how can you achieve that? How can you make sure you do that? We'll talk about that later. All right. The next one is knowing yourself. That's my dad. He knew himself very well. He passed away a couple of years ago. But I can't really think of anyone in my life who I knew who knew himself really well. So in your interactions with people, you need to, I think, be clear about who you are and how you operate. Because if you're going to be starting a business, if you're in a stage of starting a business, and you're not clear about how you operate in the world, then that will make the journey harder than it should be. And I just want to qualify that a bit. What I mean about that is you're going to come across a lot of people in business, particularly if you've gained some success and you invest time and money in what you're doing. And you can pick all sorts of people to help you do what you do. But pre-think the sorts of people you like working with. Pre-think what your boundaries are around behaviours and expectations and time and money. Think those things through a little bit before you start engaging with others, so that you've got a clear sense of what are my values, where will I go, where won't I go, where do I start and end. And I think that's all I want to say on that, but that for me, in regards to this, and here is Jim, which is the third one for me, which is understand a little bit about not listening to advice. There's a secret to getting good advice, and there's a secret to listening to people when they give you advice. I don't think sometimes I listen, so it's important to listen. But what you might find is that people you should listen to are already there. It's just that you don't ask them, or you don't listen to them. So having the right people around you is important. I think a couple of times in my working life and in my businesses, as I said, from an entrepreneurship point of view and a startup story point of view and the whole enchilada thing, I think I probably didn't listen to some people along the way. And then when I started working with people, I didn't engage the right people along the way. So take out of that what you will, but it's important to have trusted advisors. And here's Jim. We still have a very good working relationship in a different way now, but someone that I value and someone that I've listened to for many years. And if you can get those people in your team, for your collaborations, then find them early and keep them. Oh yeah. So you're building something. You're building a business, and I love this piece of research here, and this distilled down to this statement from Albert Sevilla. Make sure you are building the right it before you build it right. So test the model. You know, is it the right thing? Our first time around, it was a pretty good model, but it wasn't really for anyone. It was too generic. When we honed it down to the golf courses and the race courses and the clubhouses, it became better. The it bit was right. We thought about, who is this for? Who is this business for? What have we built this for? And I'll come shortly to, I guess, a methodology to do that. Again, which I would emphasise, I didn't use the first time around, I'm sharing my mistakes, but I certainly, with the people I work with now, we insist that anyone that comes and works with us uses, we use a business model canvas. There's lean technology, design technology, we use different models, but I would insist, when you've got a business, have a business model to model out what happens if. What if I plug that much money in? What if I sell it to those people? What if I have a cost revenue balance like that, and my margin is this if I sell it to that many people? Who are my partners that I need to get this business going? Who are my suppliers? Get all the bits on one page. The business model canvas does that. 9 elements. You can put all the bits on one page and test out one version of your business model. You know, we are going to sell this to golf courses. All right, what does that look like? No, I haven't got a sense of it. Right, we are going to sell this system now to registered clubs, which we did as well. We sold it in Canberra to a lot of registered clubs. What does that look like? So it's not difficult to test it, and it just allows you to try and find some of the traps, try and find some of the opportunities, to have a model to play with. Okay, just want to revisit our journey and what happened to us, the disruption, the difficulties, the challenges as we went along the way. So you remember when we started our business, it was paper-based, and we thought we were going to be pretty smart and develop an app for our business, so we developed an app in our business. And that was really clunky when apps started, because when the app market first began, remembering we didn't have many customers in America at that stage, most of our customers were in Australia and New Zealand, and when the App Store came out, you had to buy the app in American dollars using the App Store. You couldn't buy an app. The App Store was only on the American app market. It wasn't an Australian app market. So we thought we were pretty smart. We built this app. Don't even want to go working with Apple at that stage about building it. There wasn't much margin in it. We didn't do it for profit. We did it because we wanted to be at the leading edge of what we did. So we had to give the guys at the golf courses, what's the card? You know, when you buy an iTunes card. We had to send them a $10 iTunes card so they could go on and buy it. So the technology wasn't there at that stage for them to go and buy stuff online like it is now. So it's clunky. So you can see how we invested in something, thought we were going well. We didn't quite think that out. It was good. We looked good. We looked like we were a leading edge. So it was kind of a nice look. Practically, it didn't quite work. We also had, at the time that we did that, we had the challenge that there wasn't an Android market at that time. So here we are, smarty pants, we're doing this, and then guys will say, I don't have
I don't have an iPhone. Right? Okay, we spend more money with the IT guys and build another platform and all of that. You know, I'm not an IT guy. I use IT and I've invested in IT and I've had smart people build things for us because we've got the IP, we've got the content, but I don't profess to understand what that means in the back end. I just know that when you start entering the projects and building websites, platforms, apps, that you're always revisiting, going back and forth, so there's a high opportunity cost. The iPad, that came along. We'd invested at that stage with a partner in a hardwired pad, control pad, to control the use of chemicals in a chemical shed that could be connected to the internet, hardwired. Wi-Fi wasn't at the stage it was then. It could be hardwired back into their database so they could, someone would come in. Chemicals are very important, they've got to be monitored in their use because it harms the environment and humans. So the guys would come in and they would tap on the hard device what chemical I'm using, what the conditions are, windy, sunny, I need oil, what the mix of chemicals is that I'm using and how long I'm going to be spraying for. And that was going in, and they'd be able to control. We thought we were the smartest people in the world. $5,000 for that device, and lo and behold, what came along? The iPad came along, and then the apps that sat inside the App Store all could do that stuff that we'd written. We'd written the program for it, we partnered with someone, we produced some hardware. We didn't sell a lot of them because a device came along that shifted and changed their market. Then web-based apps came along. Do you recall those? Do you remember that? So you had to just get apps before this. You just had to get apps from the Android store or the App Store. But then we had one of the IT guys say, "Oh no, you can write your own apps. You can put them on. You can run web apps." What does that mean? And so we spent a whole heap of time on research and development, adapting some of our tool and our technology to web-based formats. Again, look at the space of time all these things have happened in and how they affected us. So, last part of what I want to talk to today is to talk about some of the stuff I've learned. We've had a course at the Business Centre for the last 4 years on innovation practice and innovation management, both for individuals, but for companies and people in business. So I can get a sense of, well, deconstruct this whole buzzword innovation thing that's going on. What does it really mean? So we went digging for some learning frameworks around that. We found in Australia, we've got a wonderful vocational education and training system and higher education system, and we discovered that there were actually some people that had already done some work in our system, and they created units of competency or units of learning in management practice. Innovation management, innovation practice, and innovation leadership. So we built a course around that. So that meant we had to take a deep dive into what does that mean? How do we teach people about innovation? And so I'm just going to share some of the learnings that we've had from that. Because it's okay to have buzzwords and it's okay to do courses and this, that and the other, but what does it mean to take a deep dive into innovation and say, I'm going to create this product, or I'm going to make my business more innovative? And so we came up with a course to help people do that. And I just want to share some of the insights from that. So, first thing I do is go back to some seminal theory. And Joseph Schumpeter is considered to be the father of innovation, an Austrian academic that ended up teaching at Harvard. And his whole theory is around the innovation cycle. And the bit that this is a bit I've sliced out of it that I think is really interesting, I'll share with you. But this is, I guess, a distilled version of what his theory is. Innovation is a gale of creative destruction that describes the process of industrial mutation that incessantly revolutionises the economic structure from within, incessantly destroying the old one and incessantly creating a new one. So, given what I've just shown you with the iPad, with apps and so on, we've been in that cycle now. Now he talks about it, that it is in cycles, and the slice that I just said that I want to catch out of that is this one. And I call it taking early rents. But it's this one. They're called Schumpeterian rents, are earned by innovators and occur during the period of time between the introduction of an innovation and its successful diffusion. So what I've said to a lot of people and startups that we've worked with over the last few years is,
those early rents don't stay there for a long time. Now that might contradict what I said a little bit earlier about hastening slowly, but I don't mean it in that way. I just mean some of these markets that have begun to develop, they've got opportunities for early rent. So being incisive and clever and tactful around that, I think is important, but they won't be there forever. So there's new way, we've seen, there are new ideas of things coming up along the way. Uber thought that they had it wrapped up, and then along came Lyft, and so on. The market gets diffused, and then Facebook might now get diffused by being broken up like Microsoft was, or or being held to account about its disturbance and its monopoly behaviour. So things won't always be around in the way that they are. So we, I guess, in helping share that with people, we try to make them aware of that. Another thing that I think is really interesting to be aware of, and again, we didn't know this existed until we did the deep diving. The Australian Chief Economist produces what's called the Australian Innovation System Report annually, and that's a really, it's about that thick, but it's not a typical government report. It's got some great case studies in there. I would recommend you download it. It's on PDF. You can get it from the Australian Chief Economist site. It's called the Australian Innovation System. And it's got some really good insights about the way things work and don't work with regards to innovation and research development perspective, from the sorts of behaviours that businesses that are more innovative than others are, and the sorts of investments that businesses make internally to be a more innovative business compared to other businesses. So, good insight. So I've spoken about that we use the Alex Osterwelder's tool, which is the business model canvas. So regardless of what industry you're in, have a model that you can go back to, so that when you try a different business idea, you can at least go back to a consistent, baseline about how you interpret, what lenses you put on the idea or the opportunity. I'm not saying which one to use. I'm just saying use one. It's my advice. We use the business model canvas, and many partners such as 1804, Dandia, Slingshot, Newcastle City Council through IQ, 376 through the workshops that you run. I know you run Lean. So whatever you do, have a method, have a methodology. That's the business model canvas that we use, and that's the methodology that I said about just laying everything on one page. It's almost like a helicopter view. It's rather than being behind the wheel of the car and driving the business to where you need to go. This is more getting up in a helicopter and looking at all the moving parts. Now, as Jim would know, cost structure and revenue streams, they would have spreadsheets that would lie underneath some of the assumptions about margins, about gross profit, and about how many units do you have to sell, and the labour costs and so on. But you can at least get the header statements and the overview of them on one page. Great, free. On YouTube, just go to Business Model Canvas. There's beautiful animated 2 and 3 minute snapshots that break these segments up into more detail. So I can thoroughly recommend those to you to just help you clarify. And the example that they use with the ones online at the moment on YouTube, to use the example they run through of setting up an airline, such as a Jetstar or a Virgin, where you're essentially, turning the airway model on its head, and they use this as a way of illustrating how to play out a business model. Now, learn fast, learn cheap, or fail fast and fail. You remember I spoke to you about the model we use with the PGA? There's no sense us sinking money into those guys with something that would have failed. So we put something up that was convincing and able to articulate what we could offer, but we didn't spend a lot of money on it. They didn't like it. We could just move away from it. But I don't think it's a bad maxim to have. Get something, and with the people, Gordon, who works in our business with a lot of the tech startups, is very much about getting people quickly to an MVP. A minimum viable product, a version of it. We've got a great friend at the business centre called Jennifer Holland, and she's got a great business that began, it's called Throat Scope, that began with a simple problem. she had 4 children under 4. I think one of her children had a condition, an illness where they had to go to the doctor a lot, and her child's throat had to be checked quite often. You may have heard Jennifer's story already, which meant that she could have a child who was under a lot of stress already. She'd see a doctor, as I understand Jennifer, when she told me the story, struggling with trying to get the depressor and the torch and all that happening. She said, what if you could have the torch and the depressor all on one device? And that became the throat scope. But Jennifer tells a great story. What she did was she went home, she got a torch out of some cheap torch shop, one of those cheap import shops. She sticky taped it onto a paddle, a wooden paddle, and she thought, right, cheap. The next thing then was the burden that she then had of regulation. It's being used in the medical environment, the cost, assumptions that she had to test on producing that and then selling it at scale for the production cost, and the protection of the IP. Easy for me to tell that story now, but that was a 4-year journey for Jennifer. Okay. Get out and understand what you do. I love this picture. I'm not going to say too much more about it. It's pretty self-stated. A lot of people design things and they don't think about the user experience. I believe there's a methodology in design now that's conventional, that they'll set an area up with buildings and they won't put any pathways in until people start using the area naturally. They'll then put in the pathways and infrastructure once people determine where they will go and how they will move. So maybe think about this. All right. Can I just quickly, we're now going to jump into what's my style of creating? What's my style of innovating? How do I work? And I'll finish this with a Leonard Cohen, Bob Dylan story, but I'll take you a little bit through Cézanne and Picasso along the way. Are you a Cézanne? Are you a Picasso? Are you an Orson Welles or are you a Hitchcock? What's your style of creativity? How do you operate when you're in an environment where you need to create? All right. I'll guide you through this. We share these presentations, do we?
Yeah. Well, we can if we want. Yeah.
Because this isn't as big as it needs to be for everyone. I don't want to spoil the presentation by going on magnifying sections of it, so I'll guide you through it. This is the assumption of this mind map. Now I start when I've got my iPod on and listen to this podcast. It's Revisionist History, it's called. I think it's episode 7 of Series 1 podcast, Malcolm Glover, Revisionist History. Go and listen to it. It's so fascinating. I'm a fanatic for it, but I couldn't understand all the moving parts of it, so I did a mind map. I just listened, stop, what do you say then? Stop, what do you say then? I deconstructed it and put it up on a mind map, because you've got to join all the parts. But essentially, this is what it says. When he wrote this song, when he first wrote it, it stunk. It was not good. It was toilsome, it was pained and twisted, and it wasn't sung very well. And he did get someone to record it. He did get it recorded, but I want to tell you that journey. It wasn't until others interpreted the song, and who hasn't? U2, J.J. Cale, Rufus Wainwright, and on it goes. In fact, someone's even wrote a book about it. Alan Wright wrote a book completely on that whole song, about how intersected it is in terms of a creative piece. But it was how did Cohen, and how do people innovate? Are they experimental or are they conceptual? We'll come to that in a minute. So, as a result of this, it wasn't until he recorded it in 1984, it didn't go very well. It eventually got re-released on another record, a greatest hits record, but it wasn't until J.J. Cale at the Beacon Ballroom in New York pinched the song, or took the song. It was 15 verses. He reduced it right down to the verses that had a bit more fun about them, they were a bit cheeky, and he changed some of the words, and he changed some of the themes, and he immediately reinterpreted that piece of music, and it became a little bit more well known. But it disappeared again. But then Jeff Buckley was house sitting a house in New York City, and in the house that he was house sitting, which was a lady called Janine in Park Slope, Brooklyn, he found that record, greatest hits record, and he found J.J. Cale's version of Hallelujah on that record that he found in that house that he was looking after. He then introduced himself to that song, and he made that song his. So there's in society, there's often an interpretation that that song isn't Leonard Cohen's song. It's actually Jeff Buckley's song, but it's not Jeff Buckley's song. It's Leonard Cohen's song. But disaster happened. But one thing that did occur was Jeff Buckley cracked the code on Hallelujah. He made it accessible to people. The substance of it was still there, but he made it accessible. He cracked the code. But then he died. But the fact that he died actually made Hallelujah a popular song because no one had heard of him really. He was renowned and he was an underground success, but no one really knew about him. But when he died in his boots in the Mississippi singing Led Zeppelin, Whole Lot of Love, and passed away, that song was given another life. And so on it went, and we ended up with, I guess, Leonard Cohen reclaiming that song. Who went and saw him? I don't know if you were a fan of him, and he played that song as a man over 70 years of age up at Hope Estate in Hunter Valley and reclaimed that piece of creativity. So you see the journey of that? So maybe just think about your idea, think about your business and that process and about how you operate. Alright, another quick piece of psychology about creativity. None of you will know that, what that represents, but I do. That there represents my favourite ever song from my favourite band at that stage of life. Because there's a theory in psychology that says the songs that we listen to at the ages of 19 and 20 deeply imprint themselves on our own consciousness. So they stay with you for the rest of your life. You may or may not agree, but I'm a bit older. But when you need that song to represent that part of your life, the sense of that part of your life, or you hear that song that comes from that stage of your life, it's seminal, it's really deeply seated. And so we have a bias, I'm trying to establish here, to the sorts of songs that we had at one point in life in terms of creativity, in terms of innovation. We've also got a bias about how we innovate. So Malcolm Gladwell in the podcast that I've spoken to you about talks about a theorist, a business theorist, talks about artists. He's an economist, and he talks about theory, and he talks about how people iterate and about genius. And obviously this is Picasso. And he talks about art as being based on an economic theory. And he says on one hand we have those of us who do their great work early in their life. They work quickly, they're very specific with their ideas, they can articulate them really clearly, and they plan meticulously, and then bang, they execute on that idea. That's one form of genius. That's one form of innovation or ideation. And he calls them conceptual innovators. Picasso was a great example of that. He burst onto the scene in his late 20s. He electrified the art world, and it's maybe him who we typically think of when we think of a genius. But I don't think, as Gallison thinks in his theory, that there is just one form of genius. He says there's another form of genius, which is more a Cézanne. So what he talks about then is, he calls them conceptual innovators. These are people that are more likely to never have a really clearly articulated idea of what it is that they're trying to create. They dwell. They don't work quickly, and when they start, they don't really know where they're going. They're very much trial and error, endless drafts before they get to something that they can be happy with. And these are Cézannes. Both geniuses though, in hindsight, both Cézanne and Picasso. You know, by Cézanne and by Picasso, no one can doubt their genius in terms of being creators, in terms of being innovative around what they do. It's just that they work differently. So other examples of that might be Herman Melville, who publishes Moby Dick at 32, he's a Picasso, as opposed to Mark Twain, who toiled over Huckleberry Finn and is obsessively kept rewriting it and didn't release it until he was 40. He's more of a Cézanne. Or you think about Orson Welles, who had a one masterpiece of a movie, and then you think of Hitchcock, who just kind of made the same movie over and over again, just different, same movie but different. And I'm going to finish now with the last story, which ties me back to that map that we were playing, that landscape we were playing in Leonard Cohen. And the story is of Leonard Cohen's respect from afar of Bob Dylan, and the reverse of that, Bob Dylan's respect of Leonard Cohen from afar. And it's said that in 1980 they met in Paris finally, they met with each other. And Leonard Cohen asks of Bob Dylan, that song, I and I, how long did that take you to write that song? It was considered to be one of his seminal songs and a masterpiece. He said, how long did that take you to write? And Bob Dylan says it took me 15 minutes. And Bob Dylan asks the reverse of Leonard Cohen, how long did it take you to write Hallelujah? And he said 2 years, but he lied. It took him 5 years to write that song. So you can see how people come at things differently, and for me that kind of bookends what I've hoped to share with you today, that a startup is a journey and there are different ways to approach that. You probably need to know how do I approach it, what is my approach, and there are many things that happen in your journey along the way, so prepare yourself for the journey and understand there'll be many players along the way in the journey, and there's some great ways to help you do so. I sometimes, when I do a presentation like this, I finish with a slide that I am capable of listening to new music. I have a daughter who's 18 in September, and she constantly exposes me to new music. So, you know, it may not be that we are just defined at the songs that we hear at 19 or 20. I think we all are capable of listening to new music. So, the one that I usually have at the end of this presentation I've shared before is Shawn Mendes' Stitches, next new song. And that gives me great memories of my daughter. So there are different ways of looking at things. That's about it. I hope that's been useful. I wanted it to be useful. I wanted it to be authentic. I wanted it to be truthful. I didn't want to, you know, say that it was any more than it was or any less than it was. It was what it was, and it is what it is. And it's very interesting that a person that's been living on the journey is in the room. I didn't expect that. That's fine. But I hope that's useful. So thank you for your time. If there's any questions, happy to have them.
Thanks, Steve. What we might do is we might do like a couple of questions, because we did go over a bit over time, but then if you're happy to stay back afterwards, then we can do more questions afterwards. So does anyone have any questions? We might just take one or two.
I'm happy just to do some one-on-ones.
Yeah.
That's fine. Jim?
How's an observation? What you talked about there was quite insightful, and I think in my experience a lot of business took go through similar journeys that you have. And that's not to say that I haven't done that either, and I can relate to a lot of the things that you've done there. I do want to impress upon people the point that you made about making sure you understand your market, what you're trying to do, and get to know and get to test it. Testing it is a big element. Everyone's got an idea, but unless you actually understand the marketability of it, the scalability of it, and whether it's a useful thing, well, you know, you may be wasting your time. And I'll just finish up on a question you asked me when that photo was taken, about what advice I might give, what advice my 25-year-old self would ask, and that was seek mentors. Mentors are an important element in understanding your journey and trying to make fewer mistakes. You know, Steve has shared some of the mistakes he's made, but he probably could have made less mistakes if he had mentors that he could trust and could ask questions and be able to articulate the journey that he needed to take. And so if you are on a journey of running your own business, seeking a mentor is probably a big element. And I think even Steve Jobs might have actually said something along those lines where he talks about getting advice. Yeah, Steve Jobs always said about taking a risk. And great idea to take a risk, but it's a measured risk. And so yeah, I congratulate you on your shared with us today. Steve.
Jim?